All right, buddy. Thanks.
Thank you, Brian. Oh, wow. So, yeah, this is pretty intimidating, I have to say. I am a scientist, I am a Christian, and that puts me in a kind of a unique place because I have a lot of fellow believers who are kind of skeptical of me as a scientist, and I have a lot of scientific colleagues who are skeptical of me as a Christian. So it produces some interesting tension, I would just say. All right, round one. So, are science and faith really incompatible? That's the question I want to take up. And I want to approach it from the perspective of trying to understand, first of all, what is science and what do I mean by faith? So let's look at a definition of science. And to me, it's the systematic investigation and application of the reality or truth of the universe, creation. And then just think for a second about Christian faith. And of course, when I'm using the word faith, I'm referring to Christian faith. So if we think about the definition of that, very parallel definition, the systematic investigation and application of the reality or truth, in this case not of creation, but of the Bible. Now this idea that creation, that what science, the subject that science investigates, is actually a means of understanding God goes way, way back. In fact, there's a passage in Romans, if we would just take a quick look at what Paul said about this idea. Since what may be known about God is plain to them, because God has made it plain to them. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse. In other words, if you look at creation, it really is very difficult to look at that and not come away saying, wow, this is just amazing. It's like the natural response to that is saying, wow, there's something going on here. There's someone behind this. So that's what Paul's saying, is that it's very clear that God has revealed himself through his creation. I want to go back to one of the points I made in comparing science and Christian faith, which is that they both deal with mysteries. And it says this in Timothy, beyond all question, the mystery from which true godliness springs is great. He appeared in the flesh, was vindicated by the Spirit, was seen by angels, was preached among the nations, was believed on in the world, was taken up in glory. So we can't really grasp how this all works. But what is a surprise to some people is that science encounters many mysteries that are exactly the same kind of thing. A truth that's revealed, but something we cannot understand. So, just to give you an example, all of you right now are sitting in a chair, and the reason you're able to sit there is because of this force called gravity. Now, it turns out that gravity was described mathematically by Isaac Newton almost 300 and some years ago. I have to tell you that you ask any physicist that studies this stuff, and they'll say, we have no clue how gravity works. None. Because they know this is how it acts mathematically, but they can't explain how it works. So as I was preparing material for this, I thought, here's a weird question. What language does God speak? From Genesis to Revelation, it's clear that God intended to communicate. But then I started thinking about it, and I realized, well, why should I assume that it's only spoken or written language that God would use to communicate? And it's true, if you look at the description of what happened, for example, on the day of Pentecost, which was the time when God sent forth the Holy Spirit, they described this. They said, all of them were filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak in other tongues as the Spirit enabled them. And as I thought about that, I was thinking, well, okay, that sounds like it's pretty clearly talking about the different languages of the people who were there. But there's no reason to assume that that was the limit of what the Holy Spirit was doing. Isn't it the case that God is communicating all the time through many different channels? And in fact, think about the impact of music. I mean, as we listen to the band here, for example. I mean, for some of us, that is a just powerful way in which God is speaking to us. My answer to the question of what language does God speak is he speaks your language. He speaks whatever it is that you would normally be responsive to. What you need to do is be able to listen and to say, okay, God, in what way are you going to communicate with me? But it's not the only way in which God has communicated with me. And there's another way that has been very, very profound in my life, and that is through coincidence. Now, scientists have this understanding of coincidence as being just events that occur by chance, closely associated with each other, and the underlying assumption is that they have no relationship. There's no significance to those. And that was my default view of coincidence. And my grandmother had come for a visit, and she had always been a really important influence in my life, just as a person. as she would do when she would come for a visit. The first thing, we would sit down and breakfast or whatever, and she would do a spiritual checkup. So she would say, all right, Keith Allen, now how are you doing spiritually? And this particular day, I thought, I really just need to be straight with her. And I said, Grandma, I have to say, it's not that I don't believe in God. I mean, there may be God, and, it's like I'm okay with that idea. But I'm not really sure that God really cares specifically about me. I've come to what I think is a reasonable solution, and that is I'm going to be like Switzerland. I'm going to declare neutrality when it comes to this whole question of God. And she said, well, if what I believe is true, there's no neutral ground when it comes to God. If you're not actually in a relationship with him in a loving way, then you're working against him. I thought, oh, okay. So then I thought I had her pretty well there. I said, okay, all right, Grandma, I'm a scientist, so I need evidence. So how would I know that what you're telling me is true? And she didn't bat an eye. She said, oh, we just pray and ask God to make it clear. Okay, God, Grandma says I should pray to you, and she seems to know you pretty well, so I'm just asking that you would make it clear to me that what she was telling me this morning is actually true, that there's not neutral ground, and I have to choose sides, basically. So this was on a Saturday. The evening rolls around, and my habit on Saturday was to turn on Saturday Night Live and watch that. So I turned on the television, and at the very beginning they said, tonight's musical guest star is Bob Dylan. And I'm really excited because I've always liked Bob Dylan's music. So I'm sitting back, and then Bob Dylan comes on, and he starts singing this song. Well, it may be the devil, and it may be the Lord, but you're going to have to serve somebody. Amazing coincidence, right? So if that wasn't an answer to prayer, then what would have been? What form would it take? What would convince me that this was something actually an answer to prayer? So I just want to encourage you to realize that God speaks your language. I don't know what form that's going to take, and I can't tell you that it's going to look this particular way, but I'm pretty confident that if you honestly and earnestly seek God, that he will answer.